Good evening. Hello.
สวัสดีค่ะ
Sawadika.
สวัสดี
How's
ครับ
everybody doing? Huh?
you should say สวัสดีครับ
Oh, is that wrong?
what you just said is for ladies
Oh, sorry. I always get it wrong.
yeah, we had just check in with each other. Would you like to check in with us like saying a few words about how are you this morning and anything you would like to share with everyone?
Well, it's 10 p.m. here, so I'm a little tired. So I hope I make sense tonight. But if you feel like I'm not making any sense, just mute me and you can, do something else. But other than that, I'm feeling very excited to be here, in virtual Thailand, a country that has a very important role in my life, and I hope to be there very soon in person.
Okay, thank you for your check-in and thank you so much for your time, and it's late for you tonight, and we really appreciate your contribution.
Thank you.
All right, and let me start to introduce you, and after this I will speak in Thai, and you may use the interpretation room in the English so you can hear when people speak in Thai ก็เดี๋ยวขออนุญาตแนะนำอาจารย์
So
ก่อน
I'd
ที่
like
จะ
to introduce Professor
ใน
Paulo
ช่วงแรกของวันนี้นะคะ
before
เป็น
beginning with
โอกาส
that
พิเศษ
session.
มากๆวันนี้เขา
Very
อิน
special occasion today.
นิวยอร์กนะคะก็ตอนนี้4 ทุ่มแล้ว
Mr.
นะคะ
Paulo is currently based in New York.
ที่
And I'm very thankful for his time today.
เรานะคะก็ขอแนะนำอาจารย์ Professor Paulo Blikstein นะคะเป็น Associate Professor ในคณะชื่อว่า Communication
So
Media
Professor Paulo is an associate professor
Columbia University
at the
นะคะ
Teachers College at Columbia
วิทยาลัย
University.
ที่สร้างคุณครูในระดับโลกที่สำคัญ
And
ที่หนึ่ง
this university is creating
ก็
many great teachers all over the world.
เป็นคนบราซิลนะคะแล้วก็อาจารย์
Professor Paulo originally comes from Brazil,
ประเทศสหรัฐอเมริกา
but
ก็
works in the
เว
US
ลาที่นานแล้วนะคะแล้วก็
and has been working there
วันนี้
for
อาจาร
quite
ย์
some
จะได้
time.
กรุณามาเล่าประสบการณ์ที่บราซิลวันนี้ครูตาได้
And
request ไป
today he'll share with us his experiences in Brazil.
ประเทศที่เจริญแล้วมาหลายรอบแล้วนะคะ
Because we've listened to many stories from developed countries,
อาจารย์ที่ทำงานกับประเทศบ้านเกิดของอาจารย์เอง
so we'd like to listen of the stories from his hometown.
มีความที่คล้ายคลึงกับประเทศไทยนะคะเป็น
And
ประเท
there
ศ
are comparisons we can draw between Thailand and Brazil.
แล้วก็มีหลาย ๆ ด้านจากประสบการณ์การสังเกตหูตาเองนะคะที่เราคล้ายคลึงกัน
There
แล้ว
are
ก็
so many aspects that we are very similar, and it's very interesting to learn from each other.
อันนี้ต้องขอบคุณมาก ๆ เป็นไม่กี่ครั้งที่จะได้ยินอาจารย์
And it's
เล่า
a very rare occasion to
ที่บราซิล
hear about stories from Brazil from Professor Paulo.
talking about my interest about your work in Brazil, and I have been curious for so long to hear about our colleagues in Brazil. How are they doing, and how they develop their education or your projects in Brazil. And thank you so much for your kindness to share with us this morning. And without further ado, and probably over to you, Paulo.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the generous introduction. And so just to check in, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
So as you just heard, I am from Brazil. I moved to the US 22 years ago for graduate school. And when I moved to the US, my office mate was very weird, thin, young man from Thailand called Arnan Sipitakiat. And there started my connection with Thailand many, many years ago. And I was lucky to have that connection because after that, I got to meet Tukta. I got to meet many other wonderful Thai constructionists. And I developed, a very special relationship with Thailand. And I learned to admire all the wonderful work that you have been doing in Thailand for probably the longest time anywhere in the world since 1997 with the Lighthouse Project and the Candlelight Project. And it's really a wonderful example of constructionism. And today I will talk a little bit about constructionism in Brazil. And as you will realize, you might find many common ideas. But I think in general, countries like Brazil and Thailand might be, oddly enough, in a better place to innovate than countries like the US that already have a very well-established educational system. So countries like Brazil and Thailand, which are still in the process of creating a high-quality model and improve its own education system, might be in a better position to innovate if we are brave enough. So let me start sharing my screen and showing you some slides. Let's see. Okay. So you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I will, talk a lot about Paulo Freire. Oh, no, not this. Paulo Freire is sort of the most important name in education in Brazil, and as you will soon realize why. So, who was Paulo Freire? He was a lawyer whose family lost everything in the 1929 crash of the stock market in the US. And this crash, as you might know, devastated many, many countries, not just the US. And so his family lost everything. And he lived in poverty for many years. And that changed his whole outlook on life. Later, the family recovered a little bit. He became a lawyer, but he was not happy with the law, and he decided to start working with education. In particular, he started working with adults that were illiterate in Brazil, and there were many, many illiterate adults in Brazil. And he started teaching them how to read and write through different organizations. And then he also became a professor at the university in his native city. And then in 1963, he did his biggest yet project, which was a project in a very kind of remote village in the northeast of Brazil called Angicos. The project was to teach how to read and write, teach 300 adults in how to read and write, and he managed to do that in 40 hours. So in a little more than a month, about 45 days, he and his team managed to get 300 adults that were completely literate how to read and write. And that made him very famous. He was in the New York Times at the time, in many different different press outlets. And this workshop became so famous that he was invited by the president to create a national plan of education and take his literacy project to all over the country in Brazil, because back then approximately half of the people were illiterate in Brazil. So literacy was a big problem. So what was different about his plan, his project to teach people how to read and write? So normally the projects, the traditional curricula for literacy was to they had booklets, and then you would memorize lots of words like car, skyscraper, street, all kinds of different words. Oh, I see. Okay, the chat. So, okay, I have the chat open here, but it's in Thai. But if you have
don't
something,
worry. It just remind
are
everyone
people,
about interpretation. No worry.
but it looked like people are cursing me. Is that true?
Probably.
I put on Google Translate. It says.
You
Okay, so so the secret to his system was that instead of using these words that were printed on this book that was distributed all over the country, he actually went to the communities and spent time with people learning the words that were important to that community. So in this case, he went, this Angicos community was a fishing community. So he went there and then he took note of all these words like fish, boat, ocean, etc. And then he wrote this kind of customized booklet, or he created this customized curriculum that only used the words that were important to people. And because people were learning words that were important to their lives, that came from their culture, they learned a lot faster. Also, another point of this literacy project was that people would get together and talk about problems of their community and discuss, the problems, like the fish market was, the prices were not good, or someone was stealing money from the community because they were not giving them the fair price in the market. So he created this thing called circles of culture. And in those circles of culture, people would talk about stuff that mattered to them, and they would go deep in the problems. And with all of that, he managed to get people interested in talking about problems, in talking about their lives, in talking about words that were important to them, and then they learn how to read and write in this record. So things looked great for Brazil because this literacy project was going to be spread all over the country. And then exactly a year after the graduation of this program in 1963, 1st of April 1963, 1st of April 1964. Well, before I go there, there was when they graduated this, the graduation ceremony of this program in 1st of April 1963, there was a general in the graduation ceremony. There was one of the top generals in Brazil attending this ceremony. And there is, like, the historical account of this is that he, after the ceremony, during the ceremony, a lot of students would say, by learning how to read and write, I learned how to participate in life. I learned how to empower myself and understand what's going on. I went to the guy who was giving me no money for the fish, and I now get twice because I can read. I can tell him the price is not right. I can read in the newspaper what's the right price. I can fight for my rights, etc. So people are not just like reading and writing. They were changing because they were understanding what was going on in the world. And so they were making this passionate discourse, the speeches at the graduation ceremony. And this general said, you know, this Paulo Freire guy, he's not teaching how to read and write. He said he is fattening the snakes. So what he meant is that these people are not manipulable anymore. We cannot just do whatever. Now they are snakes, they are dangerous. And they were dangerous because they were fighting for their rights, right? But so this general said, and this got recorded, you know, historically, they said he's fattening the snakes. And exactly a year after that day, this same general did a military coup in Brazil. This same general became the president of Brazil. He kicked out the democratically elected government and became the president of Brazil. And the plan for, you know, national plan for education, everything was canceled. Paulo Freire went to jail. He spent, you know, many weeks in jail, and he was told that if he would stay in the country, he would be killed. So he ran away from Brazil to Bolivia, then to Chile. Then he spent a year in the US at Harvard University, and then he went to Switzerland. And then he only went back to Brazil 15 years later because if he would go back to Brazil, he would be killed by the police because he was a dangerous man. And the only thing he ever did was to teach people how to read and write. And that made him a dangerous man for the government. So later he came back in 1979 when the dictatorship was over. He became Secretary of Education for the city of São Paulo in 1989. And then finally, unfortunately, in 1997, he died of a heart attack at the age of 75. And he was made had an honorary doctor in 28 universities. His famous book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, was translated to 20 languages. And he became one of the most famous educators alive. Everything that you hear now about culturally aware pedagogy or cultural pedagogy, everything that has to do with culture and bringing the lives of learners to school or to curricula started with Paulo Freire, or was first proposed by Paulo Freire. Actually, he has 389,000 citations, 150,000 more than Einstein. So that's how famous every Brazilian is, including Paulo Freire. So what's important about the Paulo Freire's work? So first, he says that the educational activity should be situated in the lived experiences of the participant. So, you know, in Angicos, 300 adults learn how to read and write in 40 hours because of that very idea, that literacy, the content, the curricula was not imposed on people. It came from the people. And so, but that was not everything about Paulo Freire. It was not just about situating people's educational activity in their own lives. There were some other ideas that were really important. One of those ideas was what he called banking education. So he said that students are not like a deposit box where you deposit knowledge in their heads like you deposit in a banking account. So, you know, the heads of the students are not an empty space where you just deposit knowledge. That's not how it works. Knowledge is something that is constructed with the learner, and it has to be relevant to their lives. It has to be problematized. It's not just data that you deposit. So one example of this that I really like is this idea of if not banking, then what? So let's just imagine this idea that Washington is the capital of the US, or you can just say Bangkok is the capital of Thailand. So this is what people normally teach in school as a piece of data, right? So that's what you should learn. Memorize that Washington is the capital of the US. So this is banking education. But what Paulo Freire would say about this is that this is not what you should learn. You should not learn just that Washington is the capital of the US. You should be learning other things about this topic. For example, why do countries have capitals? So that's a very different way of approaching the idea of Washington as the capital of the US. Why do countries have capitals? Well, because they are organized in very politically centralized ways, and they need a capital where all the power emanates, because they have armies. The armies are normally stationed in the capital because their central banks, all the power structures are in the capital, and they need to be controlled. That's why countries have capitals. So that's just one example of how going from a banking education kind of thing, you can start to problematize knowledge. Why is Washington the capital of the US? So then you have to go back to the US history and understand that in the formation of the US, there were many different groups, political forces. Some groups, demanded that the capital should be in the South, which was, a very kind of pro-slave society. Some people wanted the capital in the North. And then there was a big bargain that was made and made Washington the capital, which is sort of in between North and South. So there is a lot of history, why Washington is capital of the US. What does Washington mean to the US, right? What are the power structures in Washington? What does it mean to the US? And who made Washington the capital of the US? So just examples of how you can go from the banking education type of thing where you memorize Washington is the capital of the US, Bangkok is the capital of Thailand, and to do it in a Freirean way, you problematize the data, the content. You say, why do countries have capitals? Why is Washington the capital of the US, etc. So that's one of the big ideas of Paulo Freire, is that you have to problematize the content. Things have to be critically examined. It's not just about memorizing inert knowledge. Another important idea of Paulo Freire is that authentic education is not carried by A to B, meaning by the teacher for the students, or by the teachers, by A about B, by the teacher about the student, but rather A with B, rather the teacher with the student. So it's the idea that education is not something you do for someone, about someone, but you do with someone, together with someone. That's another very important concept for Paulo Freire, and in what he calls dialogic education, which is an education built on dialogue, on democratic relationships in the classroom, not hierarchical relationships in the classroom. And another important idea is this idea that in Portuguese is called conscientização. Conscientização in English is conscientization. And conscientization is becoming aware. So to transform your reality, you need to become aware of your reality. So you need conscientization. So of course it makes more sense in Portuguese, but the idea of conscientization is to become aware of what's around you. That's how you can transform things. If you're not aware of what's going on, you cannot do anything, right? So conscientization is this idea that to transform your reality, you need to go from the consciousness of the real to the consciousness of the possible. So we have to go from becoming aware of what's real, the here and now, your current life, that's the consciousness of the real. And you have to see what's possible. What are the possibilities beyond your life, beyond what's going on right now? And he says that that's one of the big issues with people that are stuck in their reality, is that they cannot see what's possible. They're stuck in the real and they cannot see what's possible. So what Paulo Freire says is that education is the tool that makes you go from being stuck in reality to see what's possible and build a new reality. So that's what education should do. It should give tools for people to transform reality. So this is, of course, a very short introduction to Paulo Freire. And let me kind of wrap this part up by saying that one of the main impacts of Angicos, which was this experience of literacy, his first experience of literacy, was, of course, people learn how to read and write, but they didn't become, professional writers. One of the most important outcomes of this experience was that people felt they belonged to the world of literacy. So at the end, many people studied this experience, and one of the main things that came out of this experience for people is that they felt, I belong to the world of letters. I belong to the world of words, of literacy. So I can participate in the world in a different way. It's not that they were like writing 200-page papers, but the feeling that they belonged in the world was absolutely life transforming for them. Of course, it did not solve all the problems in the community because, there were other problems in Brazil, just like in Thailand. But a lot of the sons and daughters of those adults that went to this experience went to school, became lawyers, became doctors, and so there was a big impact. But it didn't solve all the problems, of course, and we'll go back to that. So now that we introduced Paulo Freire, banking education, conscientization, I want to turn to an example of how this can be applied. And of course, if you are feeling like this sounds familiar, is because a lot of these principles were actually used in Thailand in the Lighthouse Project and in the Candlelight Project and throughout Thai Constructionism, even though you might never, maybe you don't know about Paulo Freire. But in some ways, those ideas were connected to, Seymour Papert knew about Paulo Freire and was a friend of Paulo Freire. So there was a lot of communication there, but maybe you feel familiar, those ideas are familiar because I think in a way they were being practiced in Thailand as well. So anyways, let's move on to an example of this. So in this work that I did, it's a paper called Travels in Troy with Freire, I talk about how this can be used in technology. And the inspiration for this work actually came from Thailand, from the work of David Cavallo. And David Cavallo, who was my advisor at MIT, and he did this beautiful research on all the ways that engines are used in Thailand, the engine culture of Thailand, and showing how fantastically sophisticated Thai people were using engines. And that was a very Freirean kind of thing because people were, in a way, using technology in very authentic ways, in very creative ways. So what I did was to apply these ideas in a community in Brazil. So I went to this place called Heliópolis, which was a slum, a shanty town, or like a very poor community, as you can see, with a very like wooden houses, very poor neighborhood. And then I proposed to work in a school to do a robotics workshop in the local school many years ago. So what happened was that I said, okay, I'm going to do a robotics workshop, and I'm going to bring a bunch of Legos from MIT, Lego robotics, and the kids will love it because, who doesn't like Legos? And so I flew like 10 boxes of Legos from MIT, and I started the first day, the workshop, and I told everybody, hey, I have Lego boxes, it's going to be fun, let's do a workshop, etc. And then the kids didn't want to touch it. And I was like shocked. I said, why? I mean, this is Lego, it's the super most fun thing in the world. And they said, no, because how much does this cost? If we break it, our parents don't have money to pay. I don't want to touch this thing because I don't want to be in trouble. And then I realized that I was bringing this very unfamiliar material to this community, and with this idea that, oh, this is super fun, and it was not really appropriate because that was a foreign material I was bringing to that community. And no matter how colorful it is, they were just not comfortable using it. So then I started doing what Paulo Freire did back in 1963, which I should have done before. I started to observe what that community was doing. And I realized by going around the community, having lunch with them, spending time there, that there was a big culture of repurposing. So they would repurpose, recycle everything. So if there was a broken washing machine, they would repurpose it as a blender. Broken blender, they would repurpose it, the part in their cars. Everybody was fixing everything. Nothing was wasted. They were like excellent fixers of things and repurposers. And then I said, great. So let's use that culture, that expertise of repurposing in the robotics workshop. So then they started bringing tape recorders, VCRs, all kinds of broken things, and we disassembled them. And then we started building inventions with the disassembled parts. So you see here a Lego motor, and then a repurposed motor, and then this car that was using a bunch of repurposed materials. And then people started building all kinds of projects like this trash compactor you built from broken parts, this kind of elevator for wheelchairs built from stationary stuff, a broken tape recorder, this bus that was also built from broken keyboard and broken speakers, everything. And this is the trash compactor, and here you see like the kids working, like opening up old TVs, repurposing all these mechanisms, soldering things, etc., and then building all kinds of interesting projects with that. So this was to me an eye-opening experience, because I realized that wow, we can, even with technology, we can do what Paulo Freire did. We can understand how people use it and start from that to do something interesting, like add robotics or add computing to what they already do with using the materials that are already familiar to them. So instead of coming with like this completely new approaches and new materials, we need to learn about what they do, what materials they have, what expertise they have, and then we can add, what we're bringing. In this case, I was adding robotics, but based on materials they knew about. So, anyways, this was many years ago, and so what happens, 15 years later? So after all of this, what happened was something that today we call the maker culture, or makerspaces, or fab labs, right? Those places are where we do all of this work, but we have now dedicated spaces for that. And part of the reason we have makerspaces is that people like Seymour Papert, people like Arnon Sipitakiat, who is from Thailand, like Mitchell Resnick, Uri Vilensky, Edith Ackerman, Cynthia Solomon, all of those people have been telling the world for 20 years, like, kids need a place to make stuff, to build stuff, and classrooms are not really good enough. And so as a result of a lot of this work, now we have makerspaces. So makerspaces are, those places that and you have one at the SIL, we have many around Thailand, places where you have all these tools to make, invent, create things. And so that's a great achievement for all of us, because it took many decades to come to this place. 20 years ago or 15 years ago, when I was doing this work, if I would tell a secretary of education or a minister of education, we need to have maker spaces in every school. We need to have a special space with a laser cutter, a 3D printer, robotics, all kinds of sewing machines, tables for kids to make and create stuff. 15 years ago, they would say, you're crazy. Like, this is an insane idea. What kids need to learn is math and language. And I'm not bringing a laser cutter to school. That's crazy. A laser cutter belongs in a factory. So it's amazing that in just 15 years, we went from a crazy idea to something that's in hundreds or thousands of schools worldwide, including Thailand. And the first one was at the SIL. So I think you should be very, very proud of being the absolute pioneer of makerspaces in the whole country of Thailand. It was because of the Constructionist community in Thailand that this whole movement started back in 2013, where Tukta built the first one at the SIL. So what's the problem with makerspaces? One problem that I wrote in a paper with Professor Valenti recently is that where is the knowledge construction in makerspaces? So where is the actual learning? And the example we use in this paper is that we observed a classroom where kids were building catapults in the makerspace. And so they built all kinds of really cool catapults, to launch this marbles and this paper spheres. And so you can see there is a model with a rubber band, models with springs, all kinds of different sizes and shapes. It was super creative. The kids were having a great time. They were super happy. And then we asked the question, but what are they learning? And the teacher couldn't really answer the question. The teacher was like, well, they're learning how to be creative. They're learning how to make stuff. And we asked, but what about the physics of catapults? What about the mathematics of catapults? What about measuring the distance they can shoot the marble? What about calculating the angles and optimizing the design? And the teacher said, no, we're just making stuff. We're not really, doing any of these other things. So then, we said, well, what about using, for example, this software that you can use to calculate how far something goes, and maybe compare that with the catapults, and then talk about the formulas or the relationship between the angle and the distance, etc. And the teacher really couldn't tell. And then the point of this article is that in most makerspaces, obviously not the ones in Thailand because they are perfect, but in most makerspaces, kids are making things, but not necessarily learning about the underlying concepts and mechanisms and physics and mathematics of what they are making. So they're very happy making things, but we need to start showing them what's behind the making. and where the learning is happening lying behind the making. So this article is about the next step in maker education, which is we need to pay more attention to not just the hands-on, but the minds in. Or in other words, we need to pay more attention to the cognitive operations that are happening when you're building things. So when you're building catapults, don't miss the opportunity to introduce ideas about physics and math, not in a forced, bureaucratic, boring way, but in a interesting way. Let's make a contest. Let's think about how to optimize, how to throw the heaviest ball, the furthest, or whatever it is. So being intentional about learning is very important in makerspaces, because otherwise it becomes just a fun place you go, but you're not really learning a lot. When I like to mention this example because when I cook at home, I cook almost like a robot. Like I follow a recipe, I put ingredients. I'm almost I'm always not paying attention to what's going on. I'm just making the food. I know how to do it, and I do several times the same thing. If you ask me what have you learned by making the food, I would say nothing. I just follow a recipe, and I do it exactly the same every time. So it's possible to make stuff, to make things without learning anything. If you're just following a routine, if you're not paying attention, if you're not learning how to reflect on your own learning, on your own making. And that's what happens in many, many maker spaces, and we have to be very careful about that. So now I will go to the third part of the talk, which talks about this, but also about some concrete examples from Brazil. So we are working in a city in Brazil called Sobral. The city of Sobral is not far from Angicos, where Paulo Freire first did his work. It's a city of 200,000 people, 20,000 students. And in this city, we are rewriting the entire curriculum from grade 1 to 9. We're rebuilding all the science labs and they're becoming maker labs and maker/science labs. And we are retraining all the teachers in the city. So what's going on in this city? And that's the kind of final part of the talk. And I want to show you some interesting examples of what's going on. So I was talking about making for fun, making without paying attention to what's going on. So we discussed this with a teacher there, and uh, this teacher was doing, I don't know if you know the Newton disc. The Newton disc is a disc with, these colors. When you turn it very fast, you see it white because all the colors mix, and you see just a white disc, right? So in this case, the teacher said, when the science teacher said that the unit would be about light and colors, I immediately thought about the Newton's. So this is the teacher telling us, right? This teacher was being trained by another teacher. And we could use a little motor to rotate it. I painted the disc with colored pencil, spun it, and turned white. So this teacher's idea of a fun physics class using robotics or motors was to create a Newton's disc and and turn it, and then it would be fun, and the kids will see white and they'll be like super motivated about science. And then the teacher said, and then I stopped and asked myself, okay, so what? Is it just that? And I thought, if I'm not being able to see anything that will contribute to the learning goals outlined, then it does not really make sense to use this Newton disc with the motor in the session. So I want to call your attention here to this idea that the teacher was used to he was used to the idea that to do experiments in the classroom was about doing something fun, like take the disc, put a motor, turn it, it turns white. It's amazing. But after the training that we did, and after all these conversations about constructionism, about Paulo Freire, that you also know about a lot of this stuff, the teacher was like, "Well, so what? It's not just about being fun. It's not about just about hands-on. It's about reflecting on what's going on." And he, in this case, realized that the disc was not really helping anyone reflect on light and color. So what he did was to, instead of using the disk, he created a whole kit for exploration of light and color. So you can see here, it's a very low cost kit, but it has LEDs and batteries and different shapes, etc. And a box where you put the light inside, and you can mix different colors of light, you can mix different shapes, etc., etc. So instead of a Newton's disk that's just a demonstration, he created a kit for kids to build their knowledge by experimenting, by trying out different things and everything. And then there was even a worksheet here on top that had lots of questions about, for example, can you make, if you mix red and green light, what do you see? If you mix yellow and blue, what do you see? So there were lots of questions for kids to experiment with. So see the difference between the Newton's disk and this kit. I think it's quite amazing. So the other example that I'm going to show is a project on the nervous system. So this teacher used to teach the nervous system by using the blackboard, the whiteboard, and just lecturing. And then through this project that we did, he decided to build a kit for exploring the nervous system by kids building their own neurons. So the kids would build their own neurons using the absolute best robotics platform in the whole universe called the Gogo board. You might know about this board. I don't know who created it, but it's the very, very best in the world. So using the Gogo board, which I said is the best, he created a kit for kids to create their own neuron. So in this case, what you're seeing here is that the kids are, it's nice because the textbook is almost submerged in all these materials, right? And so they created in this example an eyeball with a sensor and the eyelids, So when an object comes close to the eye, this eyelid model, there is an eyelid that closes. So you can see here with there is a motor, there is a distance sensor. So imagine the difference of learning the nervous system by a lecture where you see all the categories, or you learn all the stuff, you memorize everything, and learning the nervous system by building your own neuron. And of course, they did different kinds of circuits, not just the eyelids, but they did the knees and other parts of the body, right? But they built their own thing, and they were reflecting on how it works and how their body works, etc. The third and last example that I'm going to show is about the vertebrates, vertebrate animals. So again, they had this very, instructionist unit where they would lecture about stuff, etc. In this case, they started this unit by doing, the phylogenetic tree, showing all the different animals, and then the teacher created something very interesting. The teacher created a kit, an animal building kit. So with wings and heads and feet and all kinds of things. So you would take this this kit that your students would get, and you have to build your own animals, imaginary animals. So they build this Dynamake or the marine giraffe or whatever, like all these crazy animals. But it was not just about making something crazy. They had a worksheet, for example, this one, where they had to explain how this animal feeds, how this animal breathes, how it reproduces, how it moves. And it's, so this stuff is all in Portuguese, but basically what's, you know, when you build an animal like this, they say, how does it, why are those horns here? And then they had to build the animal, but also explain the horn. So they had said, well, this is to protect from predators. Uh, and why are the feet like this? Well, that's to make swimming faster so they can, run away from predators, but also float when they need to float. So every single body characteristic of this animal, the ogo marinho, or the like kind of marine, like it's sort of a fish, uh, giraffe. No, it's not a giraffe. It's something. Uh, they have to justify why they designed it that way, right? So here, he has very, like pointy bones, and this star-like shape is how it, kind of runs away from predators. He swims like a dog, and his tail stays outside. So, anyways, it was not just like, oh, let's make a fun animal. Let's have fun. No, it was really about form and function. So create something fun, but you have to justify everything you did in terms of the knowledge of biology that you were learning. And so, after that, they had to. There was a big exhibition at the school. Um, and they could see each other's animals, etc. And so, what all of this is saying is that these ideas of constructionism and building and making things, but also reflecting, they are not only doable, but they're doable even in a developing country, in a public school with very few resources. And this is not happening after school. It's happening during the normal class periods by normal teachers that were just trained in this way. Of course, they have a maker lab, they have a laser cutter, they have all the infrastructure, but they also have, this pedagogical creativity to create all of these different units that replace what they already had before. And so there's some interesting things that teachers say. They say, one of the teachers said, the most visible change is that students said my classes had slowed down. My classes are slower. Before I would arrive, explain, write something on the blackboard and ask, everybody understand? And they would shake their hand and I would move on. But in the electricity class, when they weren't able to turn on the lights, I said, have you tested all the possibilities? Write down all the possibilities that didn't work out, and you end up finding one or not. I ended up not saying to them, here, uh, look, here's the answer. So the teacher said this amazing thing, like, my classes slowed down. Before it was just like content, content, content. Now it's like, look at all the possibilities. You'll find something that works. Uh, so it was not really about giving the answer, but it was about telling people to keep investigating, to keep looking. And one of the things we realized then in this whole process is that the role of hands-on, the role of experiments changed a lot throughout the process. So it starts with, in the beginning, it was just experiments confirm theory, then experiments are to capture students' attention. So that let's do something really fun, like an explosion, whatever. Then the third step was that they learned that experiments are to learn more about the content. And finally, they understand that experiments, maker education, hands-on stuff is really to build their own knowledge. It's not just to, confirm the theory or capture students' interest or imagination. And so this teacher, said to us at the end, said 2 years from now, if I ask the student about an experiment, I want them to say, I learned that this concept is connected to this, this, and this, and not, oh, the teacher is great. He did an experiment with us. He set things on fire. I don't remember what it was for. So that's again, we think a really amazing testimony, because the teacher is saying, I don't want to be remembered by the fun teacher who blow things up, who set things on fire. I want to be remembered by the teacher who connected ideas, connected concepts for my students, for his students. So, anyways, I want to leave you with the idea that I talked about Paulo Freire. I'm sure you might, those ideas might feel familiar to you, but Paulo Freire was a man who started his life in poverty. He had this idea that education is about emancipation. It's about changing the world. It's about consciousness. So it's about becoming aware of the possibilities that you have in life, and that education is the great tool that you use to go from the real or the reality that you're in to the possible, to the world of possibilities. And I also talked about how it's possible to connect with the local culture. It's possible to connect with how people use technology, and that how we have makerspaces now and all these different tools that allow kids to do this kind of work of inventing things to improve their lives, of inventing things to uh, improve the lives of their communities, but how we also need to be very intentional about not making it only about making things, but also about learning through making. And I also finally talked about how this can be implemented in real schools, how this can be implemented in real classrooms. And it's really about changing the mindset, the paradigm, that it's not about making for fun, setting things on fire, but it's creating this rich and engaging environments in which people learn by reflecting, by engaging, by being critical problem solvers, by working together, and how that might sound very familiar to you because a lot of what you do in Thai constructionism is already like that, and how maybe you can take some new ideas from this talk and apply to what you do. And with that, I thank you very much and look forward for your questions. Thank you very much.
ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you very much Paulo.
Thank you.
I've learned so much. Very inspiring to hear about Paulo Freire's background. This is the first time. I normally just read his work, mostly translated in Thai or in English, and it's nice to hear about how he grew up, and that's very inspiring. Okay, so ก็ตอนนี้อาจจะเป็นเวลาที่
It's time for reflection
นะคะ
and clarification.
อาจจะเป็นคำถามเกี่ยวกับตรงหน้างานเราที่อาจจะเกี่ยว
or
ข้อง
any questions that you have in connection to Makerspace,
Lab ในโรงเรียน
App
โรงเรียนบ้าน
Learning Lab,
บ้านขายใหญ่ดารุณศิกขาลัยอยู่ที่นี่ด้วยนะคะ ถ้ามีคำถามก็
like
อาจจะ
those
เป็น
at บ้านสันกำแพง and Thailand.
อาจารย์ได้โดยตรงเลย
It's
ด้วย
a
ค่ะ
great time to ask
ท่า
now.
นที่ทำงานกับเด็กเยาวชนนะคะในแง่มุมที่
For
อยากจะ
those who have been working or working with youth,
ก็สามารถ
working with communities.
มาแล้วค่ะคำถามแรกจากพี่เสมาค่ะ
So the first question from
แนะ
Sena.
นำตัวนิดนึงให้อาจารย์รู้จัก
Can
ค่ะ
you introduce yourself a little bit?
อย่างนี้ต้องอาศัยล่ามแหละ เพราะว่าพี่ไม่ถนัดภาษาอังกฤษเท่าไหร่
ได้เลย
So
ค่ะ
I'll use the interpreter.
ฝากสวัสดีอาจารย์
So
พ
สวัส
อ
ดี
รู้ว่าอาจารย์จะมาพูดเนี่ย พี่นั่งรอหน้าจอเลย แล้วก็ทุกครั้ง
you were
ที่
coming,
ฟังอาจาร
I
ย์
was waiting.
รู้สึกมีแรงบันดาลใจ
And
แล้วก็
every
รู้สึก
time I
ว่า
listen to you, I'm
ที่
inspired.
เราทำมาเนี่ย มันก็อยู่คล้ายๆกับ
And I feel like the work that I've been doing
แต่มันก็
is
ยัง
also in
มี
the path that you've been
ช่องทางที่จะต้อง
advising us on. And
แล้
I
ว
know that
ที่
there is space for
เรื่อง
improvement.
เปาโล
When
เฟ
you
เล่
talked about
พี่ก็มองว่า
Paulo Freire,
สิ่งที่เรา
I
ทำ
was like,
ณปัจจุบันนี้กับ การ
yeah, the
พัฒ
things
นา
that I've
ใน
been doing
หรือในระบบการศึกษา
about
โดยเฉพาะ
developing people in my
เหมือน
organization.
เปาโลเปเล่นี่แหละ ที่
We've also been following Paulo Freire's
การ
words
คิดแล้วก็เชื่อมโยงจากสิ่งที่เขาทำแต่
connecting things around
ผมเองเนี่ย
their
ยังไม่
environment.
สามารถที่จะมาทำเหมือนอาจารย์เปาโลปัจจุบันนี้ได้คือมีเครื่องมือ
I haven't been
ที่
able
เป็น
to
ที่จะให้เขา
do
เนี่ย
what you, Paulo,
เรื่อง
do
ต่าง
now
ที่อาจารย์สอน แต่ทีนี้อยากจะฝาก
using
ถามอาจารย์ว่า
technology in the classroom.
ผมได้ทำวิธีการเนี้ย
My
คือไป
question is
วิธีการเรียนการสอนในอาชีวะ ซึ่งเด็กอาชี
I've
วะ
been
เนี่ย
trying to change the vocational education system.
หลาย ๆ ที่ใน
The
ระบบ
strength
การศึกษา
of
ไทยเนี่ย
vocational school is that
เพี้ยนไปตรงที่ว่า
they have
ให้
to
อาชี
make
วะ
things.
ต้องจำซึ่งมันไม่
But
เกิดประโยชน์
now the Thai
And
education system wants the vocational school to
เนี่ย
repeat
เครื่องไม้เครื่องมือในโรงเรียนมันก็
just that way.
แต่ถ้าจะเอาพวกแฟบเลอหรือต่างๆเข้าไปเนี่ย เหมือน
So
ที่อาจารย์ยก
equipment
ตัวอ
in
ย่าง
the
เลยว่า
vocational school are enough.
เขาจะรับไม่ได้เขาจะว่า
But
เอาตรงนี้
theory
มา
that the Thai education system forces us on is very
แล้วไอ้สิ่งที่มีที่อาจารย์ย
very
กตัวอย่าง
strange to them.
ในบราซิลเนี่ยเขาไปแกะอุปกรณ์ในคอมพิวเตอร์หรือต่างๆ แล้วก็เอามา
So your
ประดิษฐ์
example of Brazilian kids
ทีนี้ถ้าใน
taking
อาชีวะ
apart
ไทยเนี่ย ถ้าจะต้อง
equipment, taking apart stuff.
มีอยู่ในช็อปที่มันอาจจะล้าสมัยเนี่ยแล้วให้เขาสามารถเชื่อมโยงต่อยอดไปสู่เครื่องมือเครื่องจักรที่ทันสมัยมากในโรงงานอุตสาหกรรมปัจจุบันเนี้ยมันจะต้องมีกระบวนการยังไงคือคำถามก็คือจะให้ตัวผมเองเนี่ยไปสร้างแรงบันดาลใจหรืออินทิเกรต
So
สองอันหนึ่งเนี่ยอย่างไร
My
อย่าง
question is, how do I inspire and integrate
ตัวสถาบันการศึกษา
my
เนี่ยยอมรับ
students to try to use the equipment in their
คำถามอีกนิดนึงนะคะพี่เส
ครับ
คือมาจากเรียกว่าใน
So I'd like to repeat and clarify your question.
ชีวะซึ่งมี
So
การลงมือ
the
แล้วซึ่ง
context is vocational
มัน
education
ไปทาง
where hands-on learning is very familiar,
แล้วตอน
but
นี้ที่เขาก็
it's
มี
been shifted into more theory-based and repetition.
เขาก็เหมือนยังใช้ความคิดเดิมอยู่คำถามของพี่เสมา
So even though there's new technology in their labs, they still have to rely
เอ่
on
อ
forced
อุปกรณ์
old
ที่เขามี
theory.
หรือว่า
How do you integrate
มา
this
มาสู่
old understanding with
นี่ยังไง อันนี้
new
การเข้าใจ
equipment, and how do you connect that with Paulo Freire's
Oh, okay.
theory?
ได้ค่ะพี่เข้าใจว่าน้องฟิล์มแปลให้ครูอยู่ใช่ไหมโอเค I think the translator had beautifully translated my Thai question. You okay with that? With the question?
Can you like ask again in one piece in English, because with the breaks it's a little.
Okay. So from his experience, he has been working with polytechnic education.
Yeah.
For a long time, and from his observation, they were already hands-on, but for some reason they focus in kind of like still like remember the content and not so much hands-on and reflective kind of education. And even nowadays, some of them had received like modern digital like fabrication technology, but they are still in the old mindset. So his question is how he himself can help, like, you know, the transition from what they already have, probably with some misunderstanding of reflective kind of education, to get close to what Paulo Freire had done. So that's his
Yeah, okay,
question.
okay, great. Thank you. So I think I mean that's you know a long conversation, but I think a lot of times it's not about giving people the tools and saying do whatever you want and I'll come back later to see what you have done. And it's also not the other extreme, which is to give people very step-by-step instructions. So it's somewhere in between that the magic happens, right? People need to have some structure because they need to feel safe in the environment. But you cannot, if you overdo it, if it's too safe, too structured, then people also don't realize their full potential. So you have to find this sweet spot, which is, the right amount of structure and the right amount of freedom. So what Paulo Freire would say is that if you don't have enough freedom, then people, not only they are not being creative, but they start interpreting that environment as a place for oppression, as a place where they don't go to create things, that they go there to comply, they go there to obey, they go there to follow orders, because there is this hidden curriculum, there is this hidden rules in the place that you might not even, they might not be written in the wall, on the walls, but the students understand by, they understand what's going on, right? They understand that, oh, this is a place that we come to follow orders, to comply, to obey. And then they don't do their best work, right? Because who wants to do their best work in a place where you don't feel you're welcome, you have freedom, you have, right? So there is a lot of this hidden curriculum in a lot of spaces in polytechnic education. There is this hidden idea that, oh, you're here because you're not as smart as the other people who went to university, so we have to control you, we have to tell you exactly what you do. And so I think what Paulo Freire would say is that you need to break that mindset of, so of course it's not like, hey, do whatever you want, but you need to say, let's open things up. Let's have more creative projects. Let's let people, invent things that are not all the same. Give them some time to create things. And, of course, there are some things that are more technical that they might have more like a lecture or learn how to, what are transistors, what are resistors, whatever. But communicate to them through the activities that this is a place for freedom. This is a place for invention. We trust you. We appreciate your ideas. And then they might start to think, oh, this place is really different. And they understand that there is there's a message being delivered there. So I think, of course, this is a very interesting topic, and thanks for the question. But I would start there.
พี่เสมาได้คำตอบนะ thank you ขอบคุณค่ะ
ครับฝากขอบคุณอาจารย์เปาโลด้วยเป็นคำตอบที่
So, thank you
ทรงพ
for
ลัง
your answer.
แล้ว
It's a very powerful answer.
แล้วก็
that I
ต้อง
have
มา
to
ปรับ
do.
ให้เข้ากับบริบทของวัฒนธรรมไทยขอบคุณอาจารย์เปา
And
โลครับ
adapt it to my context. Thank you.
that's a powerful answer
Thank you.
I didn't say that Sema said that
What?
just kidding okay มีถ้าระหว่างรอคำถามอื่นครูตามีคำถามเหมือนกันนะคะ
So I also have a question.
ตาก็อยู่ในประเทศไทยทำงานมาสักพักหนึ่ง
So I live and work in Thailand.
เห็นว่าวัฒนธรรมเรื่องของการ
See that the culture
เรา
of
จะชื่นชมความคิดเห็นจินตนาการเด็กๆที่แตกต่าง
admiring imagination, different imagination.
ทำโปรเจกต์ที่หลากหลาย แล้วเราเหมือน
We open up spaces for
ที่เราจะ
different
appreciate
projects.
ความสร้างสรรค์ของแต่ละคนมาเป็นทางเลือก ซึ่งมันมีอีกอันหนึงก็คือการแข่งขันโรบอติกส์ซึ่งอันนี้ก็เป็น
receive this culture of appreciating
แต่ก็มอง
students
เห็นด้วยว่า
through
ใน
like
คน
the
โรง
example of
เรียน
robotic competitions.
รวมถึงตัวเด็กก็มีดีมานด์ความ
And
ต้อง
I
การ
see
ที่
that schools have this
เรียก
demand.
ว่าราง
Students
วัล
also have this demand
ขันนั้นเพื่อ
that they want awards from these competitions
ไปข้างหน้าหรือว่ามันช่วย
to inspire them to push them forward and validate them, confirm them that they
มัน
are
เป็น
good.
ของ culture นี้แต่ในมุมคุณตาก็เห็นว่า
So there are these two cultures of
ความภาคภูมิใจที่การแข่งขันเนี่ย
competing.
มันให้แต่เราก็เห็น side
And
effect
also
มันด้วยเนาะว่ามัน
there's
แข่
a
ง
side effect of
ก็ไม่ collaborate แล้วหลาย ๆ ครั้ง
there's
ครูกับเด็ก
less collaboration when
ว่า
students are
ให้มัน
competing
โดยที่
and teachers are
จะเป็นยังไงก็
are
ช่าง
led to
ตอนนี้ครูตารู้สึกว่า
trace
อยู่ใน
achieve the rewards instead of
สอง
inspiring kids.
คือ
So I'm stuck in the tension of
ในโซนที่ว่า open นะ แต่
two
มันก็
culture.
ถูกเรียกว่าวิพากษ์วิจารณ์จากสังคมแบบหนึ่งเหมือนกันว่า อย่างนี้คือ easy ไง ใครๆก็เป็นผู้ชนะ เพราะฉะนั้นจะดีกว่าถ้าพานักเรียนไปที่
Because
ที่มัน
sometimes there are
เพราะฉะนั้น
comments from the outside saying that it's very easy
reality
letting all the kids
ที่
become winners, and it's
อยากจะ
good
ฟัง
more
ความ
better for them to
ว่าอาจารย์เห็น
compete each other.
ท่านนี้ไหมแล้วก็
So I'd like
เราจะ
to
ทำ
ask
ยังไง
you
ให้
if you see this tension as well,
ความภาคภู
and
มิใจ
how
สามารถเกิดได้ในเวทีที่มันเปิด to
how do you
diverse idea
inspire
เปิด
self
กับความหลากหลาย
confirmation,
ของเด็ก
proud
ๆ ทุกคนสามารถเป็น
pride
ผู้ชนะได้ เราจะ
for
เราจะ
every
พา
kid in a competition?
เคลื่อนไปทางนั้นยังไงได้บ้างอย่างเงี้ยค่ะ
And how do you push the society to accept everyone?
Okay, now someone needs to. It's,
I
I,
okay
I'm too old to remember the beginning.
okay this is easy for you like in my reality there are two extremes of how we empower students in the making education, and like one that open to diverse idea. Everyone can be successful in their own perspective. Everyone has their own unique kind of work. And then the other extreme is the tough robotic competition. And in Thailand, I had seen like the demands of teachers and students to get validation from highly competitive robotics competition, and some teachers even criticize the more open and diverse kind of expo, that's kind of like easy, and it doesn't really give like confidence and real pride to the makers. So my questions is how can what else that we can do to kind of like open or shift the mindset to empower students into the more diverse kind of expo instead of like the tough robotic competition. So
Right. So who asked that question? Oh, you asked it. Okay. I didn't know if you're translating or. Well, that's a great question, and I think I would use the analogy of sports, right? So we can have sports competitions in schools, but it doesn't mean that if you are doing sports in a non-competitive way, just to be healthy, you're any less than the people who are doing competitions, because competitions are not for everyone. They require certain personality. They require certain dedication of time that not all the kids have. They require sometimes parents that have the resources to support you. And they require, a lot of resources that are not for everyone. And some people, they just don't like competitions, and that's not bad. There are kids who love to play soccer or whatever. What's the popular sport in Thailand? Like badminton or some, I don't know, whatever it is.
ตะกร้อ
Huh? What?
ตะกร้อ
Okay. Yeah, that thing.
will teach you.
Okay, so that thing just said, like, there are kids that love to play sports for the fun of sports, not for competition. They don't like to be in a competition, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think there is space for both. But the moment you start valuing one too much and the other not at all, you start to get in trouble because in society in general, we need both types of people. We need the highly competitive people that love competitions, and we need people who are more collaborative. Imagine if everyone in our societies were highly competitive and they had to win every time and they couldn't take second place. I mean, it would be an unbearable world, right? We could never collaborate. People would be fighting all the time and everything. So, I think there's space for both. But the problem is that we often see competitions as the only way to prove that you are successful is by winning. And sometimes there are other ways to show that you can be successful, which is to prove that you can collaborate, to prove that you can work for the joy of doing something and not for winning. And often, there is interesting research showing that for many people, when you take out the competition of some things, they completely lose interest. So imagine those kids that are very good at robotics competitions, but then they get to college, to university, and there are no competitions anymore. They have to do it because they like it. And then they don't like it anymore because what they liked were the competitions, not the robotics. So I think we need to really, change that mindset. If that's the mindset that's prevailing in Thailand, change it and show that, competitions are great for some people, but they are not better than kids who do things for the joy of doing things, or because they think it's interesting, or because they like to collaborate with their friends. And I think that's a very important message. There's also a
Yeah.
question here on the chat about Kun Peron. I don't know if you want me to answer that.
Well, while I'm reading this question, I may ask the person who's raised their hand. น้องแท็บคะมีคำถามใช่ไหมคะเชิญเลยค่ะ
ใช่แล้วครับคำถามของผมก็คือว่า
My question is that
ที่ฟังมาก่อนหน้านี้ครับที่บอกว่าจริงๆแล้วอาจารย์เปาโลเนี่ยตั้งแต่ตอนแรกเนี่ยก็อยู่ก็ค่อนข้างเป็นนักกฎหมายใช่ไหมฮะก่อนที่จะ
that you said that Paulo Freire
เรื่องของการ
is a
ทางการศึ
lawyer
กษาคำถามก็คือว่าอะไรเป็นสิ่งที่ทำให้อาจารย์เปาโลเนี่ยสามารถที่จะเป็น turning point ในการที่จะพลิก
What was
ชีวิต
his turning point
แนวคิดตัวเองเนี่ยให้สามารถที่จะเผยแพร่แนวคิดเนี่ยไปทั่วโลกได้ เพราะว่าอย่างโดยบริบทแล้วจริง
and spread philosophy on
ๆ
education?
อย่างที่เหตุการณ์ที่ทำให้เปาโลต้องออกจากประเทศเนาะก็กลายเป็นเรื่องของการปฏิวัติอย่างเงี้ยครับรัฐประหารมันก็ค่อนข้างอยู่ในสถานการณ์คล้ายๆกันกับบ้านเราเหมือนกันว่า
I was saying that he was also
ที่
in exile because of political
อ
coup.
ย่างไม่ได้
It's also
คือว่าอะไรคื
similar
อสิ่ง
to
ที่ทำให้
Thailand,
เปาโลเนี่ย
where there's less freedom of speech and freedom
เชื่อ
of
ว่าเรื่องนี้
thinking.
ที่จะเผยแพร่ไปสู่คนระดับทั่วโลกได้อะไรอย่างเงี้ยครับ
So what was behind Paulo Freire spreading his philosophy around the world
พอประมาณนี้ไหมครับประมาณนี้
ค่ะ
and shifting from
ล่ามกำลังแปลคำถามให้ค่ะ
ครับ
Paulo are you
What was
I-
behind Paulo Freire's philosophy?
เดี๋ยวพี่เช็คก่อนเปาโลนี่หมายถึงเปาโลเฟเร่ใช่ไหมคะ
ใช่ครับ
โอเค
ใช่ครับ
ค่ะ พอดีชื่อเดียวกัน Okay,
ใช่ครับ
so his question is around like Paulo Freire's history and when like he was once being exiled out of the country because he offered ideas to different ideas to the country, and his question was like what is the turning point when and how that his ideology became like widely accepted in the country and around the world.
I wouldn't say, well, so there are many people in Brazil that are against Paulo Freire because, of course, we often say in Brazil that, I don't know, it's like the saint, the house saint doesn't do any miracles. I don't know it's like, you always think the best is outside, right? At least in Brazil, it's like that, oh, we should, if Paulo Freire is Brazilian, he's probably not very good. Like, we should look for someone outside. So many people don't believe in what he says, and many people actually think that what he says is very dangerous, it doesn't work, and what kids need is discipline and the basics of knowledge. Like they need to learn basic math and basic language. They shouldn't be like changing anything in the world. They should accept the world as it is, get a job, and make a living, and that's what life should be about, right? Interestingly, those people, for their own kids, they want everything, right? They want the best, like schools, the most creative environments, the most amazing jobs, but they often say, well, for the other kids, I just want to give the basics, the most kind of boring education. But I think the turning point for Paulo Freire was, because he was exiled, he went to Harvard, he went to Geneva, and he worked there for many years. And then many countries were asking for him to come and help with their education systems in Africa and Latin America. And so I think then people said, oh, they like him everywhere outside, like they love him outside. He must be great. So let's get him
Bring back
to Brazil. So I think there was some of that he was recognized outside, and then he became very well known. But I think it's just that he, I think he was ahead of his time, and the ideas of critical thinking, and later, much later, they became things that everybody wanted. And I think a lot of people said, well, he was talking about this way back in the 60s. I mean, I must also say that, and I think Arden asked this.
That's a great link to that question.
Yeah.
มีคำถามอาจารย์โรเจอร์ถามไว้ในแชทว่าถามถึงอาจารย์เปาโลแบบความคิดเห็นของอาจารย์เปาโลนะคะว่าเปาโลเฟเร่เนี่ยเมื่อเทียบกับคุณพารนเขาเห็นความเหมือนหรือแตกต่างยังไงไม่ใช่ว่าท่านไหนจะดีกว่ากันแต่แบบให้พวกเราได้เห็นมุมมองที่ว่าทั้งสองท่านเหมือนหรือต่างกันอย่างไรคะ so that's the Anand's question.
Yeah, interestingly, Conperon and Paulo Freire are just 6 years apart in age, because I think only 6 years, because I think Conperon is about 94 or 95.
94.
Yeah, Paulo Freire would be 100 years old last year. So they are the same generation, but very different. One started as a business person and the other is a lawyer, but I think there is a lot of commonalities between their thought. And in the research that we're doing about the lighthouse and the candlelight, we're writing a lot about these similarities, because a lot of the work that Conperon did in Thailand and his team in the lighthouse project was very inspired or very similar to what Paulo Freire was also saying. Of course, they were kind of working independently, probably without the knowledge of each other, but I think they were doing very similar things. I would say that one thing that is very impressive about what happened in Thailand and Conperon's work is that he focused in Thailand for many, many decades. And, Paulo Freire was going all over the world and everything, but Conperon focused in Thailand. And I think because there was this big focus in Thailand for many, many years, the results in Thailand are, I think, more impressive than the results in Brazil, I think. Because in Brazil, it was like on and off, so there is a big, everybody talks about Paulo Freire, but I think in Thailand, you have a 30-year example of a philosophy that was systematically applied in the villages, in the industry, in schools. So I think it's a much more concrete example. But I think a lot of the ideas are similar. The ideas of empowering people, the ideas of started by the learner's interest, the idea of reflection. And there are some special things about Thailand, the idea of meditation, about the idea of wellness. Those are very unique to Thailand. But I think between the Conpero and Paulo Freire, we have a big lesson to teach to the world. And that's what we're writing in a book that we hope to publish, sometime in the next year, about this whole project in Thailand that I am writing with Deborah Fields, with help from many of you.
Yeah, probably this can be a part of that book. I feel that this is an interesting kind of like comparison, kind of like reference, Kunkaron, to for our we familiar with him in some perspective, but in a learning and development perspective of like working in community, that might be an interesting point of view. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, yes. And as you say here, they are both about empowering people and giving them time to develop and mentoring them throughout many years. And that's a very powerful message. I think that through the mentorship, long-term connections, long-term mentorship, that's really where you achieve big change. And I feel that sometimes in the United States, people want fast results. They want, a 2-year project, like kind of, they want fast results. They want metrics. They want all these things. And, we in Thailand, we interviewed some people that told us over the last several years, we visited this community 120 times. And that's how things worked, and that would be unthinkable in the US, that to visit a community 120 times, because that's not efficient, right? That's not like, but that's how it was done. And it built a kind of trust, a kind of a relationship that made things move forward. So, I think that there's a lot to be learned from that.
Without his joy in this work or passion, this would be difficult and probably impossible to do those extensive visits. Yeah.
Yeah,
all right,
definitely.
Thank you so much, Paulo. I look at the time and it must be very late for you. What time is it? Like 11?
11:30 p.m.
I hope this conversation will bring you to bed with a good sleep tonight. And since
Yes.
I really appreciate this contribution. And
Thank you.
I get stuck because this is not a normal way we talk to each other, but I really feel that this sharing gives me a lot more background about Paulo Freire and his inspiring work, and including and give me perspective to compare between what we are doing in Thailand and Paulo Freire's ideology, and also your work in Brazil, and how you look at making in schools, and give us a clear idea of, it's not just fun science activity, but how we can bring the students into a deeper level of making, connecting, and reflecting. And that's really, it gives me a lot of ideas how to work with the new Fab Labs in Thailand. And I'm very interested about, what is it? Conscience, how to say that?
Yeah. Conscientização.
Yeah, that word.
Yeah.
Conscientization.
we also have our hard words, in Portuguese.
Yes, that's very interesting for me. I would say awareness, and I think it would be nice how to see connection, how making experience actually helps the kids open up and increase the awareness of themselves and their position, their place in the world. Okay, thank you so much for
Thank you.
your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, and good
And
night,
see you
and
soon,
see you.
hopefully.
And I think when you are in Thailand, we should do some kind of like small group talk like this with the Thai constructionists when you are in Thailand.
Yes, definitely.
That's an idea.
Definitely. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.
Okay, ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Good night. ต้องขอบคุณล่ามทั้งสองมากเลยนะคะเซสชันนี้ถ้าไม่มีล่ามที่ช่วยเราข้างหลังเนาะก็จะหนักมากๆเพราะว่ามันข้ามภาษาด้วยแล้วก็เป็นเรื่องของความคิดที่ต้องขอบคุณที่ช่วยให้เราได้รับข้อมูลได้ง่ายขึ้นให้พวกเราได้คิดและมี conversation. Thank you